So, Jeff, you remember The Little Mermaid in 1989?
Sure.
The first line in the movie, "A storm's a brewing."
Okay. Well, that's actually what happens here. Big shipwreck. It's a mess.
Yep.
So he's Chris, and I'm Jeff, and we're the Bible guys.
So, Jeff,
Chris.
today we're going to be looking at mailbags.
Oh, those are fun.
I wish we had a little jingle that said mailbags.
That's right. Like Blue's Clues.
Yeah. Well, actually, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Maybe that's why it was in my
That
mind.
might have been it.
Yeah. So we watched Blue's Clues,
Yeah.
and then with Steve, right? And then that new guy just ruined it all.
The new guy ruined it.
Yeah.
It's not his fault, but
No, it wasn't his fault. You're right. But Steve is going to college.
That's right.
Steve is going
That's
to
right.
college.
We all cried.
We did.
Hmm?
Hey, real quick. Wow, that was random. Mailbags is basically any question that comes in via email or posting on the website, whatever it is. And so from Paul H., he says this: have you ever thought about inventing something? If you have, what would it be? And what would the main purpose be?
Yeah. Well, hi, Paul H.
I know, right? What a great question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's cool.
Man, invent something. Well, if I ever thought of inventing something, don't you think I would have invented it?
Well, I mean, not really. People have good ideas all the time. I had two good ideas that I actually talked about inventing all the time.
Oh,
the first one was, and this was a long time ago. I'm talking like I was like 12 years old, 13 years old. And I thought, why don't they make salt that's colored? Of course, now they have pink salt and everything else, right? But like,
well, I think pink salt always existed.
I know.
Yeah.
But sometimes they do dye it like green.
Yeah.
You know, like red and green for Christmas or whatever.
Yeah.
But I always thought like sometimes you can't see the salt on your food.
Oh, there you
So
go.
a lot of times I'll pour it in my hand and like sprinkle it on the food.
Hey, very clever.
So
Wow.
I thought that, and then the second one was when I was in my early 20s, back before technology really sort of took off, right? So I guess I was in my late 20s, and I thought to myself, gosh, why don't they do paperless receipts? Why don't the credit card people get together, and then every time you use something, it goes into like a storage somewhere, and you could access it instead of saving receipts?
Yeah. Wow.
Because I used to save receipts. Well, now they do that sort of thing,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So I could have been
Very
a
good.
gazillionaire.
Well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you missed it, man. I wish that maybe you missed your calling.
Yeah.
I'm not really like an inventor guy. I never go around thinking, you know what they should make or invent? I'm more of an innovator. I take what's there and go, hey, they should move this over, 2 inches.
Yeah.
This should be a little brighter, whatever.
This could be done better. This design could be better.
In Strengths Finders, have you ever taken the Strengths Finders test?
I have, yeah.
So I have Maximizer, which is one of those that you just can't help it. You got to turn the dial 2 degrees over. You got to flip the switch. You got to, right?
Yeah.
That's me. So I'm not really an inventor, but more of an innovator. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I've often thought about what it would be like to invent something. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So a friend up my street, Greg Granger, he lived right up the street from me in elementary school. His father invented the anchor, the patent for the anchor that the Navy uses.
Wow.
So he actually invented like a better anchor.
Better anchor.
And patented it. And guess what? They got rich and sold their house, and they're now moved away.
Wow.
So he is probably still benefiting from that.
So it works, man. It just takes one idea.
One good idea.
One good idea.
Yep.
Well, good, Chris. That was a good question, by the way, Paul H.
Thanks, Paul H.
That was really good. And it gave us some more insight into the wonder that is Chris Sarba.
The wonder that is Chris.
Yeah, that's how his brain works, man.
Yeah, Burt Reynolds said, that's just part of the wonderfulness of me.
Oh, so now you're equating yourself to Burt Reynolds.
No.
Yeah, no.
Hey, as long as it's young Burt Reynolds.
Okay. Okay. Well, hey, so this passage is a neat passage. It's kind of a fun passage on one side because it's almost like a movie moment, right? It turns into just a mess. But here we go. It says in chapter 27.
Acts chapter 27.
Yes.
Did we say that?
I was just saying it as you interrupted me. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it came out of my mouth
The
while you were
NLT
like,
version.
wait.
The NLT version, ladies and gentlemen, the NLT.
Yes. So as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted, Acts chapter 27, we're just going to read the first 26 verses. Today it says, when the time came, we set sail for Italy. Paul and several other prisoners were placed in the custody of a Roman soldier named Julius, a captain of the imperial regiment. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was also with us. We left on a ship whose home port was someplace on the northwest coast of the province of Asia. I don't even know how to say that.
Right.
Adramyttium?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Adramyttium? I don't know. It was scheduled to make several shops at ports along the coast of the province. For any of our listeners from that town, we're sorry that I couldn't pronounce it. The next day, when we docked in Sidon, Julius was very kind to Paul and let him go ashore to visit with friends so they could provide for his needs. Putting out to sea from there, we encountered strong headwinds that made it difficult to keep the ship on course, so we sailed north of Cyprus between the island and the mainland. Keeping to the open sea, we passed along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, landing in Myra in the province of Lycia. There, the commanding officer found an Egyptian ship from Alexandria that was bound for Italy, and he put us on board. We had several days of slow sailing, and after great difficulty, we finally neared Cnidus, but the wind was against us, so we sailed across to Crete and along the sheltered coast of the island past the Cape of Salamone. We struggled along the coast with great difficulty and finally arrived at Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. We had lost a lot of time. The weather was becoming dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall, and Paul spoke to the ship's officers about it. Men, he said, I believe there's trouble ahead if we go on. Shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger to our lives as well. But the officer in charge of prisoners listened more to the ship's captain, the owner, than to Paul. And since Fair Havens was an exposed harbor, a poor place to spend the winter, most of the crew wanted to go on to Phoenix, farther up the coast of Crete, and spend the winter there. Phoenix was a good harbor with only a southwest and northwest exposure. I think that was before it was in the desert. When a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought they could make it. So they pulled up an anchor and sailed close to the shore of Crete. But the weather changed abruptly, and a wind of typhoon strength, called a nor'easter, burst across the island and blew us out to sea. The sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind, so they gave up and let it run before the gale. We sailed along the sheltered side of a small island named Quada, where with great difficulty we hoisted aboard the lifeboat being towed behind us. Then the sailors bound ropes around the hull of the ship to strengthen it. They were afraid of being driven across the sandbars of Syrtis off the African coast, so they lowered the sea anchor to slow the ship and were driven before the wind. The next day, as gale-force winds continued to batter the ship, the crew began throwing the cargo overboard. The following day, they even took some of the ship's gear and threw it overboard. The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars, until at last all hope was gone. No one had eaten for a long time. Finally, Paul called the crew together and said, Men, you should have listened to me in the first place and not left Crete. You would have avoided all this damage and loss. But take courage. None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. For last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. And he said, Don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. What's more, God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God. It'll be just as he said, but we will be shipwrecked on an island. There you go.
Well,
what a mess.
You know, this chapter is one of the reasons why I actually am glad that you are the one reading.
Oh, all these words, I can't pronounce them.
I mean, they're just crazy.
They're real places.
For real.
This is one of the beauties of Luke's writing, and we've commented on this before. Remember, Luke is writing the book of Acts.
Right.
As a matter of fact, apparently he's on this boat ride with Paul.
Right, because he uses the pronoun we.
He says we. So Luke is writing, and Luke is so precise. And this is what's interesting. He tells you the exact places. When a problem comes up, he provides a solution. So instead of going out around, we went in between the islands. It came to the point where it was the wrong time of year. We were getting that bad time of the year when sailing. All the people who were reading would have known these particulars, right? They would have known these specific things. And it just gives a sense of authenticity that you don't get in fiction, right? It's the precision is very important. And for Luke especially. And so when he's that precise about islands and sailing weather and where the best harbors were and the fact that Fair Havens was an open harbor, not a great place to winter, all those things, when he's that precise on those things, then when I go back and look about what he wrote about the resurrection, as he mentions the witnesses of Christ, as he talks about Paul's miracles and the things that he did, it gives you so much more confidence that Luke is writing with authenticity and accuracy, and that this story is rooted in time and in place. It's not just some fictional thing. This is rooted in a real time, in a real place, in real circumstances.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because he said it's dangerous to sail because it's so late in the fall. And so what's great is that we know that it's very dangerous to sail back in those days with an overcast because they didn't have a compass back then.
Right.
So they only used the stars to navigate. So if you think about it, this took place, by the way, in October. And so, September was actually pretty dangerous. November was treacherous. So this is right there in between. Like we may get lucky,
Yeah. We want to shoot through in the last trip.
Yes, and if we're skilled sailors, then we probably have made this run before. Even though that it's pretty dangerous. So that's the context there, because it's hard for us to believe that the stars are anything more than just something to gaze at now.
Right.
But back then it was essential for people navigating ships. So that's why it was dangerous. And I think it's also interesting that Paul had more of an insight about the danger than the actual captain did.
Yes.
And so it's believed, like my notes here, my study notes say it could have been that God gave him some insight and said, like, this is going to be a dangerous trip. And so Paul, he was being held captive. He was in house arrest. And Julius was the name of the Roman guard assigned to him. And they didn't really know Paul, although Julius begins his journey with Paul and spends 2 years, as we're about to see, in this house arrest. And actually, Julius gives Paul incredible leeway eventually and starts listening to him. But at this point, he really didn't know Paul. And I don't think that they understood just who it was that was giving them advice. Right. And so they said, "Oh, who's this guy? Yeah, whatever, because they're trying to get to Rome because Paul appealed to Rome."
Right.
Yeah.
Well, by verse 21, after the shipwreck happens, or before the shipwreck happens, but when it looks like all hope is lost, Paul goes, "Listen, I told you so." Right. And it's not like you guys are jerks. It's just saying, "Listen, just to remind you, God has given me some insight." Right. And you can trust that insight. It turns out what God says is going to happen is going to happen. And from that point on, they really began to pay closer attention to him. So there's a few interesting things in here. One, and here's the big devotional component, I think. This is because we talked about this before. When you're reading through Paul's epistles, the letters to the churches, there's so much theology there. It just goes from theological concept to theological concept.
Yeah, and instruction, insights. Yeah.
And how to live as a follower of Jesus, all those kinds of things. As you read through the book of Acts, there's a lot of just narrative. Like this is a narrative. It's just a story here.
It's a story.
And it's important. God decided he wanted that story in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And so there's times in the Bible where both Peter and Paul mention that these stories were given to us for our example. So anytime you come across a large passage like that, and it's naming names of towns you can't pronounce and telling you details that you're like, why is it telling me this? What you look for is, so what is this an example to me for? What example should I be extracting there? And I think that the big picture here is, even if you're a saint, because we call him Saint Paul. Now, everybody who's a believer in Christ is a saint, but You know what I'm saying? We tend to elevate Paul like he should get special treatment from God.
Yeah.
Even if you're Saint Paul, it's not always smooth sailing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we expect that when we're a follower of Jesus, everything gets better and easier. Mm-hmm. But here for Paul, that's not what happened, right? Nature still happens. The things in the universe are still going forward.
So a friend of mine who is a counselor who used to counsel our staff of the church I used to work at, his name was Jack, and he said, listen, he goes, you're always going to have a storm.
Yeah.
And he talked about the storms of life, and here's what he said. He said a major, major upsetting and uprooting storm happens on the average, statistically. This is actually, based on study, about every 7 years there's
in your life,
there's a life-changing type of event that happens like every 7 years.
The death of a parent, a major breakup,
moving across the country,
struggle,
loss of a
sickness.
job. Yep, all those things.
Yeah.
And so he says, so chances are you're either just coming out of a storm, or you're going into the storm, or you're in the storm.
Right.
So think about that.
Yeah.
It's like,
and all of us want to be at that 3.5 year mark where, where man, it's just smooth sailing. That's what we want.
Right.
We long for those days. That's heaven.
Right.
But we long for paradise. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure, and by the way, those are major events. So that's not counting the little things in our lives.
Right.
Oh, this lady at work. Oh, she's just giving me the hardest time, and she's going to be the death of me.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So I think that that's interesting because, we have to understand that we need to prepare in this walk, in this life that God calls us through. Like I think that most of life is having to deal with things that we don't want to deal with.
Absolutely. So, Paul comes to the conclusion at the end. He's not really saying, I told you so, like rubbing it in. He's just trying to say, hey, listen, you can trust me when I tell you these things because God's given me this insight. And this is one of the reasons why you invest in faith, that you keep investing and growing. Faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God, according to the book of Romans. And so we need to spend time in God's word. It builds our faith. The experiences in our life that we survive, that we make it through, builds our faith. And so he's very confident that God is going to bring him through the problem, right? He's not going, oh my, what are we going to do? Which he's not freaking out. He's not running around. He kind of becomes a rock in the middle of all of this stress. And he's saying, and then God gave him confidence too, right? The angel came and said, listen, nobody's going to die. It's going to get rough. This is going to be awful, right? So embrace it. But nobody's going to die. You're going to survive this. And so if you knew a bad thing was coming, but you know you're going to survive, okay, that's very different. Then you kind of just, the Navy SEALs say, embrace the suck. That's what they say, right? So it's going to be bad. This is going to be bad. Just embrace it. Go through it because you're going to live through it, right? You're going to push through. Your training is going to bring through this. And it's kind of the same thing here. I think that's what he's trying to say is it's not going to be nice. It's going to be rough, but we're going to make it. And it gives you so much more confidence when you find out you have cancer, or when you find out you're going to lose your job, or when you find out that there's some kind of crisis that's happening in your life, to be able to rely on the fact that God's got this, right? Mm-hmm. God's got it. We're going to go through it, but God's got it.
So if you'll allow me and just kind of bear with me through this example, I was at physical therapy because I tore my rotator cuff on my shoulder. Oh, yeah. And this guy, the guy who owns the place comes up and says, hey, he goes, would you be up for dry needling? It'll help you with your pain. And I was like, hey, what's dry needling? And he's like, it really helps. And then he goes, are you afraid of needles? And even though I hate needles, I said, no, I'm not afraid of needles.
No, I'm not afraid of needles.
Yeah. So she comes out and she's like, oh, and by the way, I should have known, because then he says to the lady who's going to do it, he says, hey, he seems to be up for it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Anytime a doctor says he seems to be up for something. Yeah.
And I was like,
buckle your seatbelt.
Buckle up, because pressure's coming. Yeah. So anyway, she takes out these needles.
You're going to feel a little pressure.
I'm good under pressure.
It's more than pressure.
Pressure is the very definition of pain.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point is that she took needles and she started sticking them like acupuncture in my shoulder.
What?
And when she stuck it in, she goes,
like just stick them in a surface?
Well, no. She goes, you're going to feel me drive it all the way down into the muscle.
What?
So she sticks me, and then she starts driving it down, and it felt like it went down 3 inches.
Did it feel like she was stabbing you?
I mean, it was, she was great. But the point is that
it didn't do anything. They just were back in the back room laughing, going,
"That's great." Well, it was a weird sensation. And then she goes, "When I let go, you won't feel it." And she was right. Like, I felt it was there, but it wasn't like painful anymore. Well, she stabbed me 5 times. And the 5th one, I jumped out of my chair. I was like, "Oh!" She's like, "I'll use the thinner needle." In the same place she stabbed me. So finally, I'm sitting there. I'm going, and then she's like, "Now I'm going to hook electricity up to it." So she hooks electricity up to the things, and then she turns it up and says, "I'm going to increase the intensity." And so my shoulder's going thump, 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 thump like this.
Were you in an episode of The Princess Bride?
No.
Right, where they're sucking life out of you? Is that what was happening?
Right. The machine?
Yeah.
So I may go as high.
Tortured. They're tortured.
I may one day go as high as level 5. But I wouldn't know what that would do to you.
Nobody's ever survived.
So anyway, what ended up happening was she said, hey, go as high as you can without thinking it's unbearable. So I'm thinking, what is this? What is going on? So she turns it up, and finally I get to the place where I'm like, okay, right there. I think I could bear it, and any higher it'd be unbearable. So my shoulder's thumping, right? And every time it's thumping, it's like, it feels like it's being stabbed, which it is, like 5 times with 5 needles. And so then I said, okay, right there. And then she says,
that was your max.
That was
your max. That's all you could handle.
That was my max. And then she says to me, which, by the way, they didn't even tell me any of this. They didn't tell me electricity.
What was happening?
They didn't tell me anything.
Right.
And then she goes, okay, I'll let you sit there for 15 minutes.
So you pushed it, your max, all the way.
Yeah, and then she leaves and says 15 minutes.
Oh, my God.
She hands me a bell, and I thought I was going to ring that bell like 30,000 times. I was like, I can't handle it. So it's going thump, 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 and it feels like it being stabbed every thump. And then here's the fun. That's the fun part of the story. Here's the meaning of the story, and this is honest to goodness truth. Right about 7 minutes in, I actually thought to myself, I cannot survive any longer. Right? I'm just surviving like by the second here. I cannot take this any longer. And here's what I thought of. I thought of Navy SEALs.
Oh, yeah.
I did.
Wow.
I thought of Navy SEALs, and I thought to myself, wait a minute. I'm comparing this pain to what before they stuck it in my shoulder. But what if I compared this pain to like what a man should be able to bear or a human should be able to bear? And so I actually said to myself, this is bearable and I can handle this. Are you trying to tell me that other people can do this and I can't do this?
Yeah.
I'm just as strong as other people.
Yeah.
And so I changed my attitude and I said, I wonder if a Navy SEAL would say, "Ooh, take it out of my arm," right? Like they would never do it, right? And I swear to you, that's what I thought of. I thought of Navy SEALs. And would you know? I promise you that at that point, after that, I was like, "This is fine. It's bearable.
Yeah.
It's easy."
Yeah.
It wasn't easy, but like I felt like it was pretty easy to endure.
Knowing that you can survive. A lot of it is mental.
It is mental.
Right? It's so Chuck Swindoll, one of my favorite Bible pastors, preachers. He's going to be 90 in October, but I mean, he was dynamic through my lifetime growing up. He has a book called "Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond." Right?
That's great.
What a great title, right? Yeah. And that's true. So we get freaked out about what's happening sometimes, and we convince ourselves in our minds, I can't make it through this.
Yeah.
But then when you make that pivot and you go, you know what? I can make it through.
That's right.
It's just what your brain is telling you. What you tell yourself is what's probably going to happen.
Yeah.
So when you tell yourself, I can't make it, you can't. But when you tell yourself, you know what? It's only 5 more minutes. I can make it. That was my wife the first time we were going to have our first child. And Bonnie was nervous. She's like, I just don't know. I don't know I can live through this. And I was really flippant. And I'm like, what do you mean at the time? It's like 7 billion people on the planet. 7 billion other women have gone through this.
Wow.
And she goes, that's easy for you to say.
Hey, man, you have the gift, my friend. The gift of empathy.
Well, was that true? It was true.
Of course.
Every person you see, this is what people went through.
It's just quite possibly the worst thing to say in that moment.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was horrible. It was the dumbest thing. But in my mind, when I find myself facing something like that, I've had 20 sets of stitches.
Wow.
I'm just a little clumsy. And, the first couple times you're freaking out, somebody's poking thread through you. By the end, you're like, here, you want me to do it? Yeah. And so I had a nurse one time, she was getting ready to do some stitches on my hand. I cut myself with a saw, and she's getting ready to do it. And the guy was going to do it. And then he said, hey, we have a new nurse. She's never done stitches. Could she do it for you? I said, sure, it's on my hand. I don't care how it looks. So she comes in, and she looks so nervous, and I'm like calming her down. It's going to be okay. And she said, why are you so calm? This is horrible. I said, this is my 20th set of stitches, right? So here, just don't worry about no, it's going to need to be a little bit deeper. And the guy who's teaching her is laughing because I'm helping guide her through watching her sew me up. Well, the reason why that wasn't scary to me is because that was my 20th time.
Right.
To have those stitches, right? So it's going to pinch a little bit. Okay. You get all that stuff. Once you've experienced something, you're going to be okay. Well, we know Paul went through 3 shipwrecks.
Right.
Right. And so this is one of them. And so it's going to be okay. And I think that there is a lot to be said about trusting that God's in control, that life is not always going to be smooth sailing. It wasn't for St. Paul. It's not going to be for us, but we can trust that God's in control.
Well, that's a great place to end and a great message out of this passage. So we will see you next time on The Bible Guys.